Ambassador, notably, Zelensky will not be part of this meeting on Friday. I want you to listen to some of what we heard from the president yesterday.
I get along with Zelensky, but, I disagree with what he's done. Very, very severely disagree. This is a war that should have never happened, wouldn't have happened. But I'll be speaking to Zelensky.
Ambassador, what are your expectations about how this could go? And are you concerned Putin may be able to sway President Trump on certain wish list items?
Well, first, that clip you just played makes me nervous about what the president is going to say on Friday. Zelensky didn't do anything. Zelensky didn't cause this war. The president sometimes frames it as both are at fault. Russia, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and now occupies territory. And if the president doesn't have that concept in his head when he walks into the meeting on Friday, he's going to make statements and he's going to acquiesce to Putin demands that will be bad for American national security interests and, of course, bad for Ukraine. So I hope he's reading his talking points. I hope he's thinking hard about planning this meeting and not just wing it based on his intuition, based on a couple minutes of interaction with Vladimir Putin.
Do you have any concerns that domestic issues plaguing the administration, like the Epstein files, could influence any decisions that get made?
Well, there's no doubt that we've all pivoted to talking about this issue and not Epstein. That is most certainly true. But I think it's a very high stakes game for the president. The president has already handed to Vladimir Putin a indicted war criminal who's launched this barbaric imperial occupation of Ukraine. He's a person that can't travel in many democratic countries. Trump has invited him to the United States of America. That already for Putin is a giant victory. I hope the president is thinking, what are we getting in return? Because if it's just a photo op for Putin and nothing happens, I think that is a giant setback for the president and our national security interests and, of course, for the interests of Ukraine.
I keep thinking about that Oval Office meeting, this clash we saw with President Trump and Zelensky earlier this year, when Yamiche talks about being curious about the body language that we'll see in Alaska at this Putin meeting. Will he be as tough with Putin as he was with Zelensky to his face in front of the cameras? That is a big question. We'll watch for that. But as far as a potential negotiating deal to be made, if it includes Ukraine giving up territory to Russia, would that just embolden Putin down the road?
Absolutely. And who has given the president of the United States the right to give up territory of another country? Just think about how absurd this situation is, that the Ukrainians, President Zelensky, is not at the table. And therefore, I hope the president is careful not to do that. I hope he listens to what Putin thinks about and proposes and then talks to President Zelensky, because ultimately this has to be a negotiation between Zelensky and Putin, between Ukraine and Russia, mediated by us, hopefully, but not dictated by us.
This meeting is going to take place in Alaska, which is a former Russian territory. What do you make of the symbolism?
Honestly, I think it was a very poor choice. I'd love to know who was the actual person that suggested that. Just so you know, the Russian press says that it was Vladimir Putin, and the symbolism of going to a former part of the Russian Empire, that's the way the Russian propagandists are talking about it. It shouldn't be in the United States of America. This meeting should never have happened in the United States of America. But to have it there where there's some nationalists in Russia that still say that they were hoodwinked to give up Alaska, and they say, Alaska nash, Alaska is ours. There are still memes that say that. So I don't understand what the president was hoping to achieve by this, but all the more reason why I hope there's something concrete that comes out of this meeting, maybe a ceasefire in the air, something concrete, because if it's just a meeting with no outcomes, I think that will be a giant failure for the president.
We do know that there's supposed to be this sort of huddle with European allies, with President Zelensky, President Trump, and J.D. Vance, his vice president, tomorrow going into Friday's meeting. And so I'm curious, given what Europe has provided here, we know that Europe has contributed much more to Ukraine's defenses. Politico reports Europe also holds over 200 billion euro in frozen Russian assets. Do you see that as leverage, perhaps, in this negotiation?
Well, first, I'm glad that they're having this meeting, and I'm glad the Europeans are the last ones to be in the president's ears before he goes to see Putin. I think that's very important. And I think we've seen over the last several months that when he does interact with European leaders and he does interact with Zelensky one-on-one, that very famous meeting he had in Italy, it changes the way the president talks about Putin. I've seen him go back to his old ways with Putin recently and blaming Zelensky, so I hope they'll shore him up. But with respect to those assets, the Europeans should just seize them now and give them to Ukraine. Many of us have been arguing about this for years, and I think symbolically that would be important. It would be a boost of confidence for the Ukrainians. There's no reason why it couldn't be done, and literally could be done this week.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, we value your insights. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.